Okay, we are live 3 minutes late. Sorry about that. I was ready to go right on time, and then we had some last minute audio difficulties. But we are on. We are live right now on a Friday night because I put it to the supporters, what worked best, weeknights or weekends and mornings or evenings. They overwhelmingly said evenings on weekends. So I wasn't able to swing Saturday. Maybe I can do that next month, but Friday works. So joining us for supporters, we have Pipsqueak and Pakna. How you doing, guys? This is the part where you talk. Okay.
I think we were waiting for each other.
All right. And also joining us are Esoteric and Fourth Root. How you guys doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I think starting tomorrow, maybe I'll give it a few days, but I'm going to try and have a video up on Labor Day, which refutes a lot of the common mythologies about labor regulations and how that made everything better.
All right, we'll look for that. How you doing, Alex? You still got audio troubles there?
I might have audio troubles. You're going to have to continue to monitor this. It seems to continue to automatically adjust the microphone level in
well,
Windows.
You're sounding okay right now. Yeah.
Okay.
On the left side.
Yeah.
Hopefully it doesn't go too far out of whack here and it'll just be fine.
Okay, so what's happening in the world today, everyone?
Well, in my neck of the woods, we had Florida woman fly into Denver and under extremely suspicious circumstances that hopefully only ended poorly for her. That was an interesting story. Tuesday night, after midnight, so Wednesday morning, I get a phone call from the school district. I'm like, what the hell are they doing calling after midnight? And they canceled school for my 11-year-old, almost 12 now. And yeah, so that was an interesting story and raises a lot of interesting debate on the issue of gun control, especially the recent law that passed in Colorado, very recent law passed that hadn't gone into effect yet, but effectively allowed a judge to issue an order that would allow the government to seize your guns from you if you were considered a danger.
Wow. So what happened with this woman?
So there was this woman, her name is Sol Pais, or Pius, something, P-A-I-S. I know how to spell it, don't know how to pronounce it. But she was infatuated with the Columbine killers and the whole Columbine shooting. And she, I guess, I don't know what the nature of the threats were, but they say that she was making threats about going on some sort of shooting. She got onto a plane, flew to Denver, purchased a shotgun in Denver, and then went up to the foothills. And then the FBI got word that, so this woman who we've been keeping this eye on because she's got some very extremist, crazy kind of views on Columbine, on the anniversary of Columbine, has flown into Denver and purchased a shotgun. So it's one of those cases, like, because not every case is going to clearly support one side of the debate or the other. This is, more the exception that it's like that recent controversial law in Colorado about stealing stealing guns, allowing the government to steal your guns just off of a judge's order. It's one of those cases. It would be like the textbook case that everybody would point to. See, this is why we need this, and but that's basically what went down. She bought a gun. She was highly suspicious. They ended up finding her dead in a cottage near the base of Mount Evans, which isn't too far from here. And so fortunately nobody got hurt, but 500,000 students missed school that day. because that was considered a credible threat.
Did they know what happened? Did she kill herself or what?
Yeah, she killed herself.
Wow.
There's still details emerging. I don't know if she caught wind that they were onto her case. I mean, technically, she hadn't broken any laws unless the threats, depending on the nature of the threats that they claim she made. Because I also read that they didn't have probable cause to arrest her at the time that they were looking for her. There is a 72-hour rule where they could detain her for 72 hours and give her a psychiatric evaluation. But to my understanding, they didn't have probable cause, so maybe there were threats that they suspected she made but couldn't prove it at the time. Or maybe she said, I don't know what the law says about, saying something to a third party. Like if you say, oh, I'm going to kill him, but you're not making the threat to the party that you're intending to harm. I mean, there's some legal gray areas as to what you can and can't say. So I don't know what would have ended up happening had they actually caught her before she killed herself. The most interesting scenario, I should say, would be that they would detain her for 72 hours and give her the psychiatric evaluation, and then at the end of that go, well, we can't prove any wrongdoing. You are released. Here's your shotgun back. Please don't shoot anybody. We're going to have people follow you. That's probably what that would be the bare minimum what they could do.
Yeah, Scorch, this is for anyone who's, it works on both Patreon and Subscribestar, but if you go into your Subscribestar, you will have to add Discord to your Subscribestar, and you'll automatically be added to the Bogosity Discord, and it's in there. But here's, you're talking about Columbine. Here's a little known fact about that. Columbine High School had an armed security guard, and the shooters waited for him to go on his lunch break and leave campus before they started shooting. So the only guy with a gun, they waited for them to leave so that it was a complete gun-free zone before they started shooting.
Yeah. One of the most ridiculous things, is when it comes to the gun control debates is when people distort the idea that teachers who have a concealed carry license, the argument that Trump made, he's all like, well, teachers who have their concealed carry permit should be allowed to carry into the school. And everybody was like, what? You want to arm teachers? You want to force them to both teach our kids and, defend against terrorists? And it's like, no, that's a complete distortion.
Utah has been doing that for upwards of 20 years.
Yes.
And guess what? There haven't been any school shootings in that time.
Yeah, several other jurisdictions have legislation that allows that. I believe in Texas, there's a dozen schools or so that have allowed certain teachers to conceal carry. Never a problem.
As far as I know, Utah is the only one where it's statewide.
Okay. That might be the only state where it's state. It might be something like in Texas, local. Each individual school district can decide what their rules are. But anyway,
the ones that get me are the ones like, you want teachers to have guns around our kids? What happens if they go crazy and shoot the kids? It's like, well, then they shouldn't be teachers. What are you thinking that's the only harm they can do to children is if they have a gun?
Well, yeah, and presumably the teachers have already gone through extensive background checks, but also to get their concealed carry permit, they have to go through a background check. And all these horrible school shootings, many of them would be the death toll would be greatly reduced by just having an armed teacher there. So
well, yeah, or just anyone who can respond at the time and not have to wait. What's the average response time for police? 6 minutes or something like that? May not sound like much, but if you stop and think about it and actually time out 6 minutes, a lot can happen.
Try
A
holding
lot
your
can happen
breath.
in 6 seconds, let alone 6 minutes.
Try holding your breath for 6 minutes, and you'll realize how long that really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how many rounds can you get off in 6 minutes?
I mean,
Yeah.
especially when that's what I was gonna say, especially when a gun or some sort of violence is involved. 6 minutes can be the difference between a building standing and a building crumbling because somebody set off a bomb or something.
Oh, I remember when I was a teenager, I did fire school and learned firefighting and things like that. I didn't end up doing it, but went through the training, and they were showing footage of when they did it was set up on purpose to do this, but it's like you had a room and then just a fire would start just in a little corner somewhere, and then in less than it didn't take long for the room to be engulfed in fire, and after 2 minutes everything in there was pretty much irretrievable. So I mean, something like that happens, and the quicker people can act. But yeah, there was this one YouTube video where it was a police officer. I think he was the chief or something like that. But he was showing, like, people were saying, oh, well, you can get them when they reload or whatever. If you don't have a gun, you just run up and tackle them as they're reloading. And so he had, like, I think they were saying, oh, well, instead of a 30-round magazine, you'd have to have 3 10-rounds. So we had 3 10-round magazines. And he had a guy that was, I think it was either 20 or 25 feet away. And as soon as the guy realized he was reloading, he was to run forward. And of course, he wasn't actually tagging the shooter, which was on a gun range, of course, but he would just be running by it, and the camera was set up there so you would see the point where he would intercept him. And it's amazing. He started to reload. The guy started running. I mean, he was booking it, but the guy got in and got his next round off before the guy caught up to him. So yeah, reloading is faster than you think.
So, oh, sorry, you were going to say something?
All I was saying was, yep, to fill the silence.
Oh, all right.
Even a revolver, like a 6-round revolver, you can load it in less than 5 seconds if you have a speed loader.
Yeah, if you practice. Obviously it varies from gun to gun. The way we really should be thinking about each gun law is, because there is a lot of variance between the gun laws, is that there's going to be 2 effects with every law. How much it disarms criminals and how much it disarms law-abiding citizens. So not all laws are created equal on this front. I mean, obviously something like one of the more innocuous ones, which would be a mandatory background check, is going to disproportionately make it more difficult for criminals to buy guns, whereas law-abiding citizens, is presuming the background check is inexpensive or free and very quick, that's not going to impact law-abiding citizens very much. But then there's other laws that are more ridiculous and will impact everybody, like Oregon's 5-round magazine ban or something like that, where that's just going to take guns away from the law-abiding citizens more than it's going to take guns away from the criminals. So you got to consider both sides, and I think that the most passionate people on this issue tend to refuse to concede points on either side for and take things issue by issue or law by law.
But I mean, even the background checks, it's a lot more than you might think. Because even if you say, okay, well, if you're a law-abiding citizen, it could be done, in seconds maybe. But if in college you were arrested with a bit of marijuana, and I mean, they just kind of have a revolving door there. People go through and they plead to a felony, and they just go right through because they say, oh, you plead to a felony, we'll just let you go. And they just got to get the plea deals going through. But guess what? That goes on your criminal record, and any felony will stop you from buying a firearm under the federal background check.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that. I recently a few months ago, attended a concealed carry class, and they did talk about felons and their prospects for getting a concealed carry permit. It's not a 100% thing. Just having a felony on your record, it might make the process more difficult. Or it certainly would make the process more difficult, but there are legal remedies if you can demonstrate that you are, if you have a clean criminal record since something in your youth. From what I heard from the instructor in that course, that it is possible for people who have committed felonies to have that ban reversed on them. So.
Yeah, but how long does that take? I mean, it's not
I don't know. I don't know.
It
probably. I mean, there should be a framework that because I do have a good close friend who committed a felony marijuana crime when he was like 16, or maybe
that's a minor. That's a different thing.
Or maybe it wasn't a minor at the time, but he had told me that he was prohibited from purchasing a gun, but he's one of the more responsible people I know, and one of the people that I would want to have a gun. I think that more people should carry guns. That's why I always carry, and I think that he should be able to carry. And I was glad to hear that there would be a legal remedy for him.
Yeah, but I mean, if you don't even know that, and the example I always give, because we see this kind of story all the time, the woman has an ex who just isn't at all deterred by a restraining order, and she's afraid for her life. She goes to get a gun, and then she finds out she can't get one, and she's got to go through this process. But then, that night she's raped and murdered by him. So.
Right. That's why I would be generally opposed to waiting periods. Absolutely.
But I mean, the background check can really be, a backdoor waiting period. And you've also, there are books like, one of them is called 3 Felonies a Day. Just the fact that just by living your life, doing things that no one on earth would think is illegal, you commit 3 federal felonies every day on average. And I mean, considering that they could get any one of us for those at any time, and oh wow, there go your gun privileges. I mean, there are just so many crazy things that they call felonies, and that's not counting, what a lot of states do.
Absolutely, and that is certainly something to be addressed. I'm always playing devil's advocate here, and
I know. But then the other point is,
I was just going to say though, in practice, most of the people who have felony convictions on their record, I mean, there's a lot of repeat criminals out there, and there certainly are a lot of exceptions, but generally speaking, the criminal justice system does work better than we like to portray it.
But the other thing is, what criminals would be stopped by a background check is the flip side of it.
When I went over to buy my pistol back in October, I spoke to the clerk and asked them if the background checks that they give ever get ring any bells, and or flag people as felons trying to purchase guns. And they're like, oh yeah, we have the cops over here all the time arresting people who shouldn't be buying guns. So yeah, I think it actually does stop some, or at least result in some convictions for attempting to buy a gun when you shouldn't.
What's to stop them from just turning right around and getting one off the black market, though?
Not everybody has black market connections. I would not know where to get.
It is amazing, what you can do when you're motivated. There are a lot of people who have become addicted to heroin on the black market because they're trying to manage their pain, and their doctors have gotten so paranoid about prescribing opioids that people who never thought that they would buy anything from the black market in their life didn't even know how to, when you're motivated by something like pain, which is a good motivator, you can figure out stuff like that.
Yes, smarter people can. However, not we hate to pat ourselves too hard on the back, but everybody in this chat is probably significantly smarter than the average person. And
I somehow don't think that most of the products being sold on the black market are targeted to people with high IQs. Exactly.
No, but also it's a matter of income. Buying a gun off the black market may be significantly more expensive because there's an inherent risk in trading black market arms that has to be recuperated beyond just the price of the firearm. And I'm not going to say that it would prevent all or even the majority necessarily of gun sales from finding their ways into the hands of, or preventing potential criminals from acquiring guns, but it probably does affect it. There's a reason why sometimes repeat criminals they might they use like BB guns to rob stores if they're repeat offenders, because, well, they can't get a real gun, but a BB gun's an intimidation tool that's sometimes fairly effective. So I've seen stories like that.
I had another point. I'm trying to think of what it was. Anyone else have anything to say?
Yeah, I was just gonna say two things that I really love about the gun control debate, particularly on the delusional side, which still actually would be in support of these gun monopolization laws, which I think would really be a more accurate term for it, are firstly, when they try and claim that there aren't any regulations on guns, or at the very least, they act like that's the case. Like, they just they act like there are absolutely no laws about buying a gun. Also, what I love is that they try and one thing that they try and claim quite a bit is that the CDC or the FBI or no government agencies have ever actually done studies or investigated the amount of deaths related to guns or murders related to guns, or the crime rates, the violent crime rates related to guns. The truth is they have. It's just that they produce results which the March for Your Lives crowd does. It's not very expedient for them. Like, as you point out, you use the CDC statistics quite regularly, Shane, and admittedly, it's been a very long time since I've actually, made a video about gun control or debated about it. But yeah, a favorite statistic of mine to use is the CDC's own statistics.
Well, not just that, but the fact that they covered them up for upwards of 20 years, so that no one even knew about them.
Yeah, that's what makes it even more hilarious. So, no, it's not that the CDC hasn't done any studies into these crimes related to firearms. It's that the results are not convenient for the crowd trying to argue that gun monopolization laws reduce crimes.
Well, and the CDC did this report a few years ago about defensive gun use, where, they talked about, like Gary Kleck's study that found the 2 million, which was similar to what they got, but for reasons that are absolutely ridiculous, they decided that the National Crime Victimization Survey, which didn't even ask everyone about it and grossly undercounted them, was more credible, even though their own figures backed up Kleck. So, all right, $5 from King Thorhammer. Thank you very much, Thorhammer. Aside from lowering regulation and raising the housing supply to lower prices, what else can be done to reduce homelessness, especially in San Fran? So thanks for that. If you want to do a super chat for me to read out, just click that funky squared off $ at the bottom of the chat. So what do you guys think? Homelessness in San Fran?
Oh, well, you
Hello, Nate.
basically, their city government is so expansive that, I mean, it's pretty much entirely a result of zoning laws. I mean, they even have minimum rent, like they call it rent control. They have rent control laws there. It's ridiculous how expansive the city government is in the housing in the property industry. And by property, I mean like housing or land occupation. But yeah, that's the have to do. But it's exactly what's not going to happen. I mean, a lot of people seem to take Machiavelli's approach with politics in the sense that all political decision is decided by the people who are ruling the state or are making decisions through the state. But in reality, pretty much all political decisions made by the state are determined by economic factors and what's necessary for it to sustain itself materially. And that's the reason why you'll see a lot of these bigger cities have very expansive states. It's not necessarily that a lot of people are like in those areas tends to be left wing. I mean, some of them are just, well, quote unquote left wing. I mean, I just made my video about centrism and the left right dichotomy earlier, but yeah, that's the reason they are is because they have all these welfare benefits which are created by the state having to expand because the industry within that area is expanding. The state needs to expand so that it can collect revenue from all the different businesses and all the different transactions which are occurring in the area. And I don't think a lot of people take that into consideration, and I think that's one of the major flaws with a lot of people's understanding of politics. It's what causes them to think that voting can achieve political change. Like my point is, even if you were to have the most quote unquote Republican government, the most free market government in a city like San Francisco, you're going to still have these problems and they're not going to get any better. That's not necessarily because of ineptitude, though I'm sure ineptitude has a huge factor in those sort of lies. It's that simply if they were to actually attempt to deregulate that industry, the state there would have a hard time controlling the market and collecting revenue because once there's actually enough revenue circulating within private businesses, that's when you start to have innovations which sort of decentralize the market around the state.
And Universal Angels is kind of wondering who we are, aside from me and Esso. The others are, you have Alex Fobble there on the end. I did say that right, didn't I? Yeah.
Yes, or Fobble, Alex Fobble.
Yeah. You may know him as Fourth Root, and he did a lot of those Thunderfoot videos with me. And then Pakna and Pip are both supporters, and this is every month I do. I did it twice this month because the first one I think was a bit early, but every month I do a hangout and I invite the supporters to join, and I also invite my Bogosity co-hosts, and it's pretty much whoever shows up. And you generally don't have a topic or anything, but this is who's shown up. And I think Daniel said he might be stopping by, but he wasn't sure. But anyway, that's who we are.
On the subject of housing in California, you also have the problem of a lot of governments there are extremely hostile to more dense development. Like, who was it? Was it Reason or Stossel who did a video on someone trying to turn an old laundromat into an apartment building, and they had to fight for years because some ridiculous government studies showed that one corner of a playground was going to be in shadow because of it or something, and it was
it was kind of ridiculous. And what got me was they were showing a lot of protesters, and a lot of the people who were protesting this being turned into housing were literally the same individuals who were also calling for more affordable housing. And it's like, okay, how does your brain work?
It's like they want to keep it all nice and suburban and preserve the whatever they say. It's like, oh, it's nice. It's very quaint. They want to keep the entire thing in a glass jar, but then you have the zoning troubles and the amount of government-owned land out that way, and of course the mountains. You can't keep expanding suburbia. You have to build upwards at some point, and nobody wants that happening. It's like, well, you're not going to get affordable housing in that case then.
Yeah, and there's something though, because I mean everything we've said applied to a lot of cities around the country, but for some reason, and I'm not sure why, San Francisco just seems just like the homeless people seem to be migrating there.
Yeah, this always reminds me of a quote from Eliezer Yudkowsky. He said in one of his books, he said, this makes me wonder what the point of having economists is if nobody ever listens to them.
Yeah, I saw that one. Oh boy, King Thorhammer, he doesn't ask the small questions, does he? We'll see what the panel has to say about this. I'm pretty much on record about this, so I'll let you all talk. But does abortion violate the NAP? When does the fetus have natural rights? You oppose statist pop control and eugenics, but you seem vexed by pro-lifers. I'm not sure what that last part's supposed to mean, but what do you think? Abortion violation of the NAP or not?
Not at any stage. I think it's acceptable even till like before the day a child's born. That's a pretty extreme view, but that's mine.
Well, there's an interesting thought experiment that I would love to test this thought experiment on somebody like Ben Shapiro. And I can't remember where I heard it first. It might have been from you, Shane, but it's the premise is, suppose you were to wake up tomorrow morning and, oh, you're not in your bed. You're in some sort of creepy dungeon where you notice that there's a needle in your arm and it's drawing blood from your arm and sending it across to the bed next to you where there's a little girl who's got a needle in her arm. And somebody comes in and says, well, I'm the father of this little girl. She's got this rare disease. And for the next 9 months, she needs to live off of somebody else's blood in order to survive. And then the question is, do you legally have a right to remove that needle from your arm? I think everybody would say, yes, you do. So at least in the case of rape, abortion should be legal. Should be a legal remedy for that. And then there's another issue that rises when, if we have the technology to save the life of a child after it has been prematurely removed from a woman, shouldn't that be the prescribed remedy? Because you can end the pregnancy without necessarily terminating the life of the child at that point. And that raises another question. How much more invasive does that procedure have to be to allow the woman to have the right to say, no, just smush it out of there, you know? So those are things that we should definitely consider.
Yeah, these are all good questions. And I mean, my feeling for those who don't know is that, yeah, I think after the fetus is viable and can be birthed and become a baby at that point, you know, I think it would be, well, I mean, we talk about laws. I'm an anarcho-capitalist and you wouldn't have laws in an anarcho-capitalist society, but within the context of the discussion, then yeah, I would say, you know, it's wrong to kill it at that point, but the woman has the right to her body and she has the right to expel the fetus from her body at any time she wants, for any reason she wants, regardless of the consequences. And if the consequences is that the fetus is going to die, then, you know, that's the consequence. But I would
agree with you to a certain extent, because certainly I think abortion beyond the point of viability is not really justifiable. If you can remove the fetus intact and it's got a chance at living, that should be the way to end the pregnancy. But then it raises an interesting point. What if you are 1 week before the point of viability? So the burden on the mother would be that she's got to carry this fetus just for 1 more week, and then that's a viable child.
But then
At what point does it become...
You don't have the right to anyone else's body for even 2 minutes, let alone 1 week.
Well, I mean, that's kind of an argument from a moral judgment. We got to wonder why. I mean, certainly that is imposing on the rights of the mother. It does take away her right to not be pregnant, but for 1 week, is that sacrifice of that right worth the life of that baby?
But then the problem there is then, okay, so why not 2 weeks, or why not maybe 3? Why not?
Yeah. The question is, how long before that point of viability could you push it back? Yeah.
And how long is it going to be before that's expanded out and even started to apply to other things as well, as government always does?
Right, but you could certainly, I think it's quite reasonable for somebody to hold the position. Well, wait a minute. Let's say there was a drug, or let's say it was an hour. A 1 hour difference made the difference between a 0% viable child and a 100% viable child. Now, in real life, that's not going to really be the case. But let's say it would 1 hour be enough? You can see how it could be reasonable that there is some level of, no, you've got to be more responsible and make this decision earlier, or you might have to be subjected to being pregnant for a certain amount of time.
I think Sports88 in the chat who's also a supporter, by the way, and thank you very much for that, is getting to the nub of the matter. When does human rights begin? And it's not really an on-off thing, because if you think about it, do 2-year-olds have the right to keep and bear arms? And I think most of us would agree, well, no, because they can't be responsible. They don't understand life and death decisions and things like that. So, I mean, you have the rights that your level of sapience gives you, whatever you're capable of being responsible for. So as soon as biologically you're able to live, quote unquote, on your own without, being outside of the mother's womb. Of course, you can't feed yourself or whatever. But at that point, then you have your right to life. And just as you become a more and more responsible human being, you gain more and more of those rights as you go, because that's where they come from.
I'm going to go ahead and be the one dissenter in the room full of angry men.
Okay.
Because I mean, my view is that this is the dichotomy under which this debate is sort of centered not around a false premise, but around sort of a false understanding of the debate. It's not that one side is pro-life or that the other side is pro-women's autonomy. The debate really is more what defines a moral agent, what defines a being which has rights. And if we're going to speak about this from a biological perspective, I mean, the very moment that a baby is conceived, I mean, the moment that the sperm meets the egg, a separate DNA sequence is created. And as early as 2 to 3 weeks, babies in the womb develop a brain, a spine, or a heart, and a heartbeat. So from the very moment that they are conceived of, they're a separate entity. And from weeks before it's even possible to have an abortion, they have a full central nervous system. So I think that if we're going to go based purely on biology, then it's perfectly reasonable to consider a baby in the womb to be a living being which has rights. I mean,
but even that being the case, even if you make that assumption, you still don't have the right to someone else's body.
Well, I want to point out that argument is just based off of semantics. Whether or not you call it a living being or not doesn't change what it actually is. It is a fetus. It is what it is. We know what it is. Calling it something else doesn't change what it is.
Well, the difference between it and a human which has been born is the difference between, one, stages of development in biology, but also stages of cognitive ability. Now that also raises a very interesting question, because if you're going to argue that they're not cognitively viable, well, I mean, is someone in a coma then not a human being? I mean, it's very, you get into some very interesting dilemmas, and I think that the abortion debate itself is a lot more depth than a lot of people give it credit for, because if you really get down to it, it's more of a debate about what makes consciousness itself.
Well,
Yeah.
it's more about sapience than consciousness. But Filthy Heretic in the chat room, I just want to say it's not really about humans and non-humans. We've just been talking about humans here. And also, hello to Darth for joining us.
Yeah. Hello. Those are interesting points, but let's also not forget interpersonal relationships. That's another important aspects that, you know, the fetus basically only has a relationship with its mother until it's born. And cognitive ability, hopes and aspirations, there's a lot of fundamental differences between a fetus and a baby, and those definitely should play into our moral judgments about, or ethical, I should say, judgments about abortion. We also have to consider the negative consequences of having a black market. You watch the movie, what was it, Cider House Rules, and you'll probably realize, oh yeah, there's definitely a need there. And if you were to do something like blanketly outlaw abortions, then the negative consequences of that would probably far exceed whatever good you might achieve.
That's interesting. Hello, everyone.
Hey, Charles, we're talking about the abortion debate here. And King Thorhammer, another $2 from him. Thank you so much. Asking another good question. Aren't parents responsible for the creation? And yeah, this is an argument from the pro-lifers that I have to admit is kind of compelling, that, you know, by making this decision, you know, to at least have sex, knowing that a child might result from it, even if you use contraception isn't 100%. So, you know, a baby might well result from that. Doesn't that give you a duty of care to see the baby through to term? So,
and
Charles, what's your opinion on that?
Precisely the reason, that's precisely the reason why I would disagree with the Rothbardian argument for abortion, because prior to the baby being conceived, it didn't exist. And in order to exist, it needs the actions of an outside actor. Therefore, making the argument that a baby is initiating force against the mother by simply being in the womb is an unfalsifiable argument.
But let's hear from Charles, because he just joined us.
Well, yeah, abortion. This is one of the most tightly emotional debates that has been around for a long time. It is, what's life, what starts, what's the freedom, and say, oh, are women just boomers for the state? These are the abortion debate will probably still be with us for a long periods of time. But as for me, I always think that, you know, when you have sex, and also if you have conception and everything, you know, the baby can still happen. And if that's the case, if both parents want to have the child and such, they, you know, hey, I might make sure you have a foundation for that child. I want abortion to be very low, like that last option. I'm talking if you want to have an abortion and such, you should at least have like foster care systems, revamp that to make sure that say, hey, if this kid is going to be given up, make sure it's given up to a system that can give it to a family, a loving family in the area and such. And if the mother of this child or father of the child are like good citizens or something like that, not criminals or whatever like that, and change their life around. Even if they were criminals, stuff like that, they still get like say visitation or something like that. So I think abortion is one of the hard things that speaking someone as faith, because so we have to take all life as precious, but it is one of the most hard things because sometimes when you bring a child in the world, it could be a very stressful. In some cases, the child might not survive in that aspect. Might not, they might not have good enough shelter or food or anything else. So it's that type of how that these type of issues and such and these type of challenges. So when I look at abortion and look at all the problems and things that came up with it, I say abortion is on the really last thing. But I truly think if you want to have to truly think that we want to save kids' lives and have more, that sort of thing, we should be having more like, if you want to, like, if you can't take care of the kid, give it to foster care. But that's a whole other situation. But give it to other family members. I don't know. I just don't like the fact that two people just say, screw it. Just say don't have that responsibility for another life that's coming into the world. Give it to parents that just can't even have children. That sort of thing. I just that's my personal thoughts.
If I may add to this, I agree almost entirely with what Esso said. You can't reasonably argue, in my opinion, that a fetus is aggressing upon a baby. But the most of the time, when I put forward that argument, a lot of people come back with modern cases of rape. In cases of rape, the fetus is still not aggressing against the mother. The rapist is. And I'm a very strong believer in restorative justice, and I think in cases like that, the rapist must be made to pay any and all medical costs associated with carrying that baby.
Yes, I agree with that as well. It should be if I think, I mean, if you do something horrific like rape and there's a child and such, because there are people who do, women who have been horribly raped and such, but keep the child and such, which is kudos to them. And that's, but I also think the rapist should pay not just in jail or go to jail, but also just pay monetarily.
Pay restitution.
Yes.
Now, rape is a certainly important ethical consideration to this debate. A couple of points here. Not every case of rape results in the rapist being caught, and therefore you can't seek recompense for the victim to help raise that child. There's another consideration in that although rape doesn't directly speak to the moral character of the fetus and doesn't imply that the fetus is aggressing, the difference with rape is that the mother in this case didn't make any irresponsible decision. She was just raped, right? Whereas if a pregnancy results from consensual sex, there is an aspect of responsibility. You created this life, therefore you may be required to carry it.
And Scorch 88, because Alex, you mentioned the black market a little bit ago. He makes the point, just because the black market will exist doesn't make it right. Well, that's true, but those are two different arguments, and we've largely been arguing about the morality of abortion or the ethics of abortion. But, even if you do say, okay, well, then abortion is murder, you say, oh, well, and therefore let's make it illegal. Let's ban abortions. Well, then you move over to kind of the practical side of things, and you have to examine, whatever benefits there might be for banning abortions, as opposed to, the harms caused by having the black market. And by the way, Detective Story is another good movie about that, although it's better in the play because they had to tone it down for the movie because of the Hayes office. But yeah, you can find all sorts of things like that about the horrors of back alley abortions.
Oh,
but
yeah.
We always have this. I mean, I don't think we're going to solve this issue tonight.
No, this issue will probably go on longer, and it'll be probably, when we are like 1,000 years, people, our great descendants will still be talking about this. So I think we should
I think until we get to the point where we can instantly teleport a fetus from a womb to an incubator, that's the point where it might become irrelevant.
Right. It's actually not going to be that long off, maybe 100 years before we have the technology where we could grow a fetus from a zygote. So basically you detect that you're pregnant and you could have that pregnancy incubated and brought to term. At that point, yeah, the debate might actually be solved in favor of abortion, or termination of the life is illegal, but transferring the fetus to an artificial womb would be the prescribed solution.
$10, another $10 from King Thorhammer. Has a lot to say, and it's really important for him to say it. Thank you so much for the support there, Thorhammer. He says, after 73, and I'm assuming he means 1973, the year, we had 60 million legal U.S. abortions versus under 3,000 executions. 1 to 3% of death row inmates are innocent, which concede is a failure of justice, but no fetus ever got a trial or a lawyer.
Well, this is a fun thing I joined into. Think this was just great.
But arguably, a fetus should not be extended the full range of rights that a born, fully grown human being has.
Well, again, a fetus doesn't have a right to keep and bear arms. It's just...
But,
I would agree with you there.
Oh, yeah. But that is like I said, these are the questions we're going to be going back and forth on abortion and everything else. So, since, hopefully I think we already talked this, dig into the dirt. Let's talk about something. Did you ever talk about the whole Trump thing this past week or something, or you didn't talk about that yet?
Which Trump? You were talking about the Mueller thing?
Oh yeah, and everyone's saying the hashtag impeach Trump thing, which is
it's crazy because I covered this on the podcast, and it's like they just cannot let go of it, and they were saying that, oh no, Barr was lying, or there was a lot of stuff he didn't tell you. There's all sorts of stuff in. It's going to be in the Mueller report, and it's going to mean that Trump's a criminal and we have to impeach him. Just you wait. And then I'm not sure when it was, a couple of days ago, they released a redacted version, at least, of the Mueller report, because I think there was still a lot of things that they considered to be national secrets, like how much they knew about what the Russians were doing or whatever. But according to this redacted report, there's still nothing.
Yeah, and you got to surprise, you got to wonder, why on earth would Barr say one thing knowing that his statement is going to be contradicted, in a couple weeks? It was obvious that the Mueller report was going to uphold what Barr said. There was really no reason to mislead the people, even if it did say that he was guilty or whatever.
Yeah, this whole thing, it's been, 2 years, all sorts of, I even forget how many, depositions and everything they were taking. No one can say that Mueller wasn't thorough. So when he says, there's no evidence for it, you would think that if there were any evidence, as thorough as he was for as long as he was, he would have uncovered it.
Oh, yes. It would have been that type of evidence. All the stuff would have been there. And I see, honestly, the sad, and people are still trying to say hashtag impeach Trump. I'm like, dude, if Trump was so weak, you would have knocked him out in the 2016, but I don't think they have let go with that 2016 election. It's like when a sports team, has a bad loss, and like the previous postseason playoffs, and they just can't get out of their head, and they just continue to suffer and have that mental shakedown. And the other party has still have not come to grips with that. And until they do, I think they will not actually really have anything to really take down Trump. Which if they did, there's tons of stuff you can get Trump on. Like just recently, he did not sign a resolution or vetoed the resolution for Congress to stop. For Congress, I think there was I think Justin Amash. I think he was a congressman, a representative. He was actually, I think he was part of this bill to say we don't want to support the Saudi Arabia war with I think Yemen, I believe, or some other war or something like that. And Trump vetoed it. He said, "Well, screw it. We just want to continue the war." And it just, that's to me like that. If he really wanted to do something, if they really wanted to actually stop with something, that would actually be get the anti-war crowd there. But sadly, there hasn't been, not much there.
Well, and the thing is, I just want to make this clear. I don't like Trump. I would love to spend every single week of my podcast talking about how stupid and wrong he is and just going at him. The way I went after Obama, maybe even worse, because I think I actually like some things about Obama better than I like about Trump. And I did not think I would say that.
Are you just saying you can dislike both Obama and Trump? Is that possible?
Imagine that. Yeah, what a concept. But it's just like the left just will not stop being idiots about the whole thing.
They have the easiest layup of all time, but they keep missing it. They have the chance to actually do something, but and it's frustrating, And yeah, I think on Scorch 88, actually he says he's terrible with gun rights. That's another thing. But then again, the left hates guns too. So yeah.
But I mean, I feel this way about the comedy. It's like, okay, we get it. He has stupid hair. He talks funny. He makes weird gestures. Come up with different things to make fun of him about.
And there's a whole rack of things, but they just won't do it.
Oh man, this is like prime material for them to work with. And they just, I don't know.
Honestly, I consider the Mueller situation it's the longest running political theater I've ever fucking seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's frustrating. It's frustrating to have this type of, because this is you look at, this is the resistance. I'm like, these are supposedly our heroes that saved the day and such. And I'm like, this is it? This is the best we have? People are still crying about Trump and his weird hairpiece. This is it? And I'm like, no wonder you guys are losing. No wonder you guys basically have no hope and no chance to actually win the 2020 elections and such. I mean, seriously, I can't wait for they're gonna have another, a guy like maybe Cory Booker who says, "Oh, we're for all the people," even though all the lobbyists that pay him a bunch of money, by the way, which is so it's so funny how these politicians can stand on chairs and tables like Beto saying they're for the people, but meanwhile still taking those nice little pay stuff for the lobbyists and such. It's kind of funny that way. And people, it's a great way to get, it works. If it didn't work, they wouldn't do it. But even with all the technology we have today, even after all the stuff we've proven, your podcast and heck, I talk on this stuff sometimes, but yet people still fall for it. It's amazing. It's like Pavlovian, that they just even though they do X, Y, Z and everything else, and they pretty much mirror each other most good, but at least it's something. At least they disagree with this thing, so we will vote for this anyway.
Looks like King Thor Hammer got yeah, go ahead, Shane.
Yep, another 10 from King Thor Hammer. Thanks so much. Last thought. Oh, hey, if you're going to keep the money coming, keep the thoughts coming as long as you want to. I'll take it. He says, I agree with libertarians on economics and individual liberty, but support rule of law, strong borders, pro-life, and mixed on foreign policy should I stay Republican or be an ANCAP? So
I think you
there's a-
should just not apply a label.
Yeah.
Right? You have
well,
your
okay,
opinions.
sure. Yeah.
There you
Yeah.
go.
There you go. Be you, man. Be King Thorhammer.
Right.
That's a
Once you
party in
apply a
yourself.
label, you give people a reason to just dismiss your views, and you can't persuade anybody of anything. So just don't even think about a label. I mean, if you want to generally describe your attitudes, just say what you said. You know, I'm libertarian leaning on most things, but there's a few things like foreign policy and pro-life. The Libertarian Party doesn't take an official stance because there are a lot of libertarians who believe that life begins at conception, etc. So,
well, in a sense, they do, because they say that since this is such a contentious issue, they would leave it to. I forget exactly what the platform says, but it's something about leaving it up to the conscience of the people involved, which would preclude government banning it.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's pro-choice.
Yeah, but there still are a lot of libertarians who say, certainly no abortion after viability. I think there's probably libertarians in this chat who would agree no abortion after viability, or nor no life terminating abortion after viability. There might be some
What do you mean
people
by
here.
viability exactly?
When you can remove the fetus
we've already
killing
rehashed.
it.
Yeah, we've already rehashed this, but it's like you said earlier. It's like, how invasive, can it be, if it's,
right.
But,
I mean,
when you're talking about things like rule of law, and Filthy makes this point in his comment, says we want a rule of law, we just don't want the government to do it. And if you think that's a contradiction, I highly recommend reading The Law by Frederick Bastiat. It's only like 50 pages or something. It's not that long. It's an easy read. The English translation on Project Gutenberg is very good. The law is not really about government. The law is what we created government to try and manage, but they kind of distorted the idea of the law to being, politicians putting scribbles on paper and pretending it means something.
And let me be clear that is an ANCAP perspective. Some libertarians do want a strong rule of law, but that the rule of law be aligned with libertarian principles.
Well, yeah, and what Bastiat says is that the rule of law is us working together for our own mutual protection and defense and things like that. And so as long as that's what the government's doing, it's fine. But, government is just people. They don't, magically get any, ability to do something ethically that would be unethical for everyone else to do.
But people think that way. They think that this, a government full of people cannot be wrong, or they have to be the best, brightest minds in the room. But reality, wherever the government, wherever the situation is, it is the quite opposite. And and before I have to get out here because I'm not feeling too well, my voice is about to just die on me, if you can hear it. The one thing I would like to say is that, the thing is, I look upon all this stuff is, I wonder if you can pick one person, though, in the next election. I know it's 1 year away, and oh, goodness gracious, it's going to be a complete and total dumpster fire, to say the least. Who at the whole thing do you want someone, if you had to pick, who would you want to actually someone to challenge Trump and actually
Alex
win?
Fobble.
Am I allowed to take an empty chair?
Am I allowed to have a bunch of voodoo people from Louisiana resurrect Harry Brown?
Sure.
Okay, then that's what Zombie Harry Brown for president.
Can I pick an empty chair? I'd really like to pick an empty chair.
Okay, one more from King Thorhammer for $2. Yeah, like I said, as long as you want to do it, I'll read it. Have you met Dapperton and Hoodie in real life? Not if you mean like face-to-face, flesh-to-flesh, but I do know their real-life identities, and I've talked to them personally. So, kind of depends on what you mean by real life. It's only over the internet, but I do know their real identities and everything.
We're all in the Matrix, Saint.
I found a interesting paradox of homesteading. Actually, not sure if you guys are aware of it. Have you
Bring
ever
it
heard of
on.
anything called the Blockian proviso?
I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, so the idea is that this is a this isn't actually so the idea is that basically I go out into some own area and then I homestead a donut shaped piece of land. So there's basically this hole in the middle that I haven't homesteaded yet, but I've homesteaded this giant circle. And so another guy comes around and there's that land in the middle, and um, so according to him is that because no one owns it, that should I be required to let him go to that unhomesteaded piece because I basically blocked it off from anyone else from getting to it.
So this is the whole, if you have, if someone buys up all the property around you, can they stop you from leaving kind of thing?
Not quite like that. I mean, I think for that one, I think for that case, if someone buys the property,
it's pretty much the same thing though. If the property in the middle is unowned and unutilized and someone else wants to make use of it, it's the same thing.
You're going to have to go down, then over, then up.
Well, the thing is, you have a right of way. If whatever property you homestead, you have the right to travel to and from it. And I mean, generally, if we're being realistic and not going into crazy whataboutism, if we're being at all realistic, there's been some way that like for example, the road I live on, that has been there for 200 years. It was a plank road that they did the horse and buggies up and down, and it might have even been an Indian trail before that. So that's really about the only form of collective property you get with anarcho-capitalism, because that is already being utilized for the purposes of travel, and since it's already being utilized, you can't have a claim over it. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. Anyway, I gotta get some sleep and some honey tea. I'll talk to y'all later.
All right, feel better, Charles.
All right, peace.
Okay, so I think in the case of if you've already homesteaded something, then someone tries to homestead around you, yeah, I don't think they could, because you didn't just magically teleport to that spot. You always had to walk there. So I think you have some easement rights over just the actual road. But now we're talking about the case where you haven't done that. So someone's homesteaded the donut, and then, okay, so let's say, all right, so you can ask, can I go to that middle part where you haven't done yet? And they say yes. So then they allow you to go there, you homestead it, and now when you try leaving, they just say, nope, you can't leave.
Well, how did you go there?
Well,
how did you go there? However you went there is how you can leave.
No, but
not necessarily.
If they grant you initially to let you in, but then they decide never to let you back out because that they have full control of their property.
Yeah, well, I mean, presumably the person who, when they initially went into the property, they would realize, by the way, can I get back out before I go in? And that would be the implicit agreement, I guess.
Okay, $2 from him, but he wants us to answer Marius Gavrila's question. Scrolling up, it looks like he's asking, would you favor a one-party libertarian state in which the party is a vanguard for libertarianism and social liberalism? I'd prefer a no-state party, but maybe that's
would you favor a state? No. Next question.
But I mean, if there's only one party, or we've seen this with our two-party state here, two parties you can take over, because I mean, if you look at all of the ones who were lobbying, they lobby both Democrats and Republicans. I mean, they're all in the same back pockets. Whereas if you have, there have been cases where you have more parliamentary type procedures where you can have like 5 or 6 different parties. It's a little more difficult to do that. So, I mean, even if you had it set up where you had a perfect libertarian party, how long would it be before the statists and people who wanted, power over others, how long would it be before they took over that party?
Not very long at all, in my opinion, because power corrupts and attracts the corruptible.
I think the Libertarian Party's already kind of screwed like that.
Well, I mean, they got this idea in their heads, and it wasn't a bad idea. It's like, hey, let's get some people with political experience to run for office, and that'll give us credibility, and then we can, get more attention for our message, but it hasn't exactly worked out that way.
I mean, as a hardcore agorist, I just think the party is itself illegitimate because you're basically taking advantage of, in some way, taking advantage of people's stolen tax money, presumably. So I think you're already committing violations.
Yeah.
I don't see how any political party can be valid.
But I mean, it's a situation that we're in. The tax money is already being taken. So why not use it to have a platform to get our ideas out? Because I mean, you run for office, even if you have, no intention of doing anything. If you just sign up and run for office, guess what? You have members of the news media just contacting you out of the blue, asking you your opinion on things. It's like, wow, that doesn't happen otherwise. Marius Gavrila, I'm pronouncing that wrong, I know. Sorry about that. But he also asks, would any of you be open towards a libertarian progressive alliance?
I don't know of any issues that we might agree on.
Yeah, nowadays it seems like, because I mean, used to be, okay, well, we had some things we agreed on, like gay marriage and stuff like that. There seems to be less and less than that. They've gotten away from freedom of speech. They're getting away from freedom of press. It just seems to be less and less that we agree with progressives on, as they just get more and more fascist and authoritarian.
I'm just generally against any sort of collectivist cooperation in general. I will voice support on an issue by issue basis. One thing that disturbs me is how much the progressives are lumping all these issues together. With what is it called? Feminism that is what's the word? Inclusive of intersectionality. That's it. All the intersectionality thing. That's just disturbing, because that's more, that strikes up more of a vibe of, oh, this is a rising ideology that is trying to collectivize people, and I don't like that.
Look at how much the atheist movement made strides. The Four Horsemen, Richard Dawkins and people like that, and they were getting attention and they were getting ideas out there, and they don't seem to be out there as much. And it seems to have coincided with this atheism plus thing, because atheism plus is just about, we reject the idea of God as an unproven hypothesis. But now, with atheism plus, now you have to, sign on to all these progressive issues and stuff like that. And I mean, that just seemed to fracture the whole movement. And it's like, what happened? So not getting the same attention that it was, not making the same steps forward as they were.
Yeah, I'm especially hesitant to associate with any group that has such a propensity to cannibalize people simply for wrongthink.
Yeah, and that's my main opposition to the whole idea of, well, we need to make alliances, or we need to have coalitions or stuff like that. And it's mainly partly to do with compromise fallacy, and how it encourages extreme elements within that group to take power, because we have to maintain the alliance, we have to maintain this coalition, and that gives people with extremely authoritarian ideas to essentially take the forefront, which I think is the major problem with modern progressives, because it's like it's as if they've worked so hard to maintain this the group of progressives that all the authoritarians in their ranks have just come out of the woodwork, because they know they won't get kicked out.
Got a couple super chats that we should read.
Before that, we have Manny Cabilt saying King's spending money like he's at the strip club or something. Yeah, he just shoved another $2 and another $5 into my waistband, and like a whore, I'm taking them both, and I'm gonna read them out. So the first one is, for me, Fee and John Stossel gave me the best info. And for those who don't know, Fee is the Foundation for Economic Education. Check them out. They've got a lot of great stuff there. And Stossel's great too. I mean, he's still making video. He doesn't have his hour-long show anymore, but he's still making shorter videos for Reason TV. And also the $5 super chat is, on your vid for GOP presidents, why didn't you mention Reagan ending the oil crisis? He instructed Volcker raise rates and lower oil regulations. Yeah, but it was about what happened overall. And yeah, Reagan did some good things, but overall, he left the government bigger than he came into it. And each budget that Reagan approved every single year of his presidency was bigger than the one the Democrats had passed the previous year. So you can't put all this on the shoulder of the Democrats.
The Blakeinator says, I don't understand how you could have enough critical thinking to be an atheist, but then identify as progressive. I would disagree with that statement. I'd say it's a lot easier to fall into these economic fallacies than it is to believe in the patently outrageous claims of religion, which are so easily and demonstrably falsifiable.
Exactly. Economics is at least complicated. You have to put some effort into it.
Right. You have to model how other people are going to think and how those how large groups extrapolate from that into large groups to have general economic policies that are sound, and that can get very, very complicated.
I do want to correct one more. I do want to correct one thing before we go on, because King Thorhammer had said he instructed Volcker to raise rates and lower oil regulations. But I mean, the thing is, he couldn't really instruct Volcker to do anything. Only Congress can give an order to the Fed chairman. But that did happen, and I think it was probably, even though he didn't have to go along with that, I think he just agreed with it. And because you had a situation where it was double-digit inflation, but they still had this policy of pushing interest rates down to the floor. And you have this problem when the interest rate is lower than the inflation rate. You have what's called negative real interest rate. Even if the interest rate goes up to 10%, if the inflation rate is 14%, then you're still losing 4% on your investments. Because, you're making 10% nominally, but now prices are 14% higher. So he let them go, and they went up to like 20%, and everyone pitched a fit. But then like a year later, we were out of that horrible recession of the 70s, and they had all gone back down again.
Okay, I'm gonna let the cat out of the bag here. Are there any Hoppian libertarians here, or actually more specifically, any who are in favor of, at least while a state exists, do you believe there's any border justification whatsoever?
I think there might be, not in the sense of stopping people from immigrating, which was, what Hoppe was getting at, but like if we were to finally take America in a proper libertarian direction, you would still, I think, want the borders to be there to differentiate you from the states, because you wouldn't want, Canada coming out, okay, this isn't a state anymore, we'll just march right in and do things our way, So you wouldn't want that to happen. So I think for that reason, you'd still need the concept of borders, not for Ancapistan, but just where Ancapistan ends and the other states begin. Anyone else? Anyone want to give it up for Hoppe here? Or
there is a there could be valid reasons to have jurisdictional boundaries, not necessarily hardened borders. And my view on that is that generally that those should follow the contours of river basins, but
I'm not sure what river basins have to do with anything.
For pollution controls, at least, it makes sense that everybody who's affected by an oil spill downstream from one location should have a say in what the regulations are in that river basin. But they shouldn't necessarily be able to, I live in Colorado, the Continental Divide crosses right down. Why should people on the east slope of Colorado be making policy decisions that affect, only the west slope of Colorado, not the east slope? So kind of makes more sense to have the regulatory oversight, if you're going to have it, be drawn around river basin borders.
Well, I mean, there is the issue that if you pollute the river, you're damaging the property of your downstream neighbors. And so
right. But if you're going to have collectivized property in some sense, like the
I kind of
water.
like what they did in medieval Iceland, because I forget what they called them, but we would call them like, districts or whatever. But you could just choose which one you belong to. You could switch basically whenever you wanted to without having to move or anything. And you would just pick which one you belong to at any given time.
I think one of the main points that I think Hoppe makes, I don't agree with, is that, so, I mean, according to his views, from what I got was that all of the roads, public stuff, all of that is because all of the money's been robbed from the taxpayers, that they're sort of the de facto joint owners and should have control over it. But then I've seen some responses to him and basically state that, well, no, taxpayers don't really have ownership over it, actually, because the state never had a right to take the money, and they had no right to purchase any of the land or conquer it by war. So it should be kind of, and because no one can and because no one can homestead it, it should be treated as like a basically property in commons. So therefore, the state can't impose any, can't restrict anyone from moving over it.
Oh, it's like earlier I mentioned the road that I live on and how it used to be, a trail and then a plank road and things like that. And I mean, it was privately owned and it was just maintained by the people who lived along it, just because they wanted a road, and they didn't worry about collective ownership or free riders or anything. They just wanted the road because it was a benefit to them. But then it was, I don't know, 20s or 30s, somewhere in there, the government just declared eminent domain and said, okay, this is ours. We're maintaining it now. And it's like, well, where do you get, because remember, ownership is about exclusivity. And when you have a right of way like that, who actually can do anything about, claiming exclusivity over something other people have been making use of for centuries?
Hey, Shane, can you make me a mod in your Lord Killian server? Because stuff's going down and your mods don't ever really seem to do anything.
Yeah, I don't have that many. Yeah, it always seems to happen when I'm not there, either when I'm working on something or when I'm asleep or something, and I don't know. Can people just behave, please? Is that a possibility?
Well, I mean, it's always like 3 or 4 people, and there's stuff going down right now, so.
Well, I will tell you, just being brutally honest, why I'm reluctant. It's not that I don't trust you. It's just that there seems to be people coming in just because they have a problem with you or whatever. And I wouldn't ever want something like that to be one-sided, where just one party to something can have the power to do that. But I mean, it's something we can talk about, but that's just kind of what makes me reluctant to do it. It's not about you personally. It's just about the fact that, I wouldn't want to, appear partisan about any of that. I'm trying to calm all of that down, if you get what I'm saying.
And that's fine. Could you, at the very least, like, you or get one of your mods to do something about what's going on in your server right now?
Yeah, I'm not really in a position to check it and see what's going on, but if any of the mods are listening, Angry or Anomaly, please go check the Discord.
Basically, on my, I'm not going to get into anything specific, but I made a video on my SO posting channel about a certain someone, and his group of friends are not taking very kindly to that. So
I'll just check it. We got like another 35 minutes in this chat, so I'll just take a look after we're done here. It's just, if you're gonna do drama like that, everyone just please keep it out of my server. I love controversies, but if you got a personal problem with someone, take it to DM, take it to someone else's server. Just please don't do it in mine. All right, King Thor Hammer, $2. Who is more to blame, the public or politicians?
That's an interesting question, because there's certainly feedback bouncing between the public and the politicians and the media monopoly or oligopoly or whatever that's going on there. It's really interesting, because perhaps if the Constitution had been set up in a different way, maybe this wouldn't be the natural state that this country has progressed to. So there's remember that the U.S. Constitution was an experiment. It was a highly experimental form of government, and I think it worked pretty well for about 140 years, and then right around what was it, the 18th Amendment, or whichever one was taxation, or
16th
the income tax.
16th is income tax, and 17th was direct election of senators, and both of those were in 1913. And you also had the Federal Reserve created in the same year.
Okay, the income tax one. So 1913, I'd say that's a pretty good marker for where things really started to slide. Before that, I think things were pretty steady. Government was not growing significantly.
Well, before the introduction of the Federal Reserve, the government had to rely on essentially backed currency, which prevented it spending beyond its means because it couldn't just get itself to borrow. It couldn't borrow money from itself, essentially, which means it had to rely on taxation, and of course, because taxation. I mean, you look at the tax receipts that the government receives. It's been 17% for almost its entirety of the existence. It's like 17% of GDP consistently, regardless of actual tax rate. So before the Fed, the government could really only spend 17% of GDP, which severely limited its growth. After the Fed, it had the ability to loan money to itself. And you never want to give a government the ability to loan money to itself because it explodes.
Well, our founders were smart enough because they had gone through it with the Continental to know that government shouldn't print money. But what we have here is the situation where, the government can just go into debt as much as it wants. So if they say in the course of a year, they want to go into debt another $1 trillion, and they put all of that, out in bonds, ordinarily what that would do, that increases the demand for loanable funds, and that would increase interest rates. The Fed doesn't want interest rates to rise, so they push it down by increasing the supply of loanable funds and creating new money. So the same effect happens. It's as if government printed that $1 trillion because that's how much the Fed would have to do to keep interest rates stable. But then we've also got this debt on top of it, and it kind of makes you wish they would just go ahead and print the money and forget the whole debt part.
Now, personally, I don't think it's valid for any government to borrow money at all because the people who pay that back didn't vote for that spending. So
right,
there's that.
Taxation without representation.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I want to just add the difference between government borrowing money and how the Federal Reserve works is if the government's just borrowing money, there's a certain limit to that as well, because government can issue bonds, yes. However, the more bonds it issues, the more people are going, hang on, something's up here. We're not going to value these bonds as highly as we initially did, and you are eventually going to reach a maximum amount that the government can issue bonds with. What the Federal Reserve does, it removes that limit entirely, because when the government runs out of people who are willing to loan the money, they just go to the Fed. And that's exactly what's happening now, is that the amount of debt owned by outside the US and within the US as well, basically the amount of debt owned by people other than the Federal Reserve is actually decreasing, and the Federal Reserve is taking on more and more of that debt. And eventually you're going to get to the point where nobody values bonds except the Fed, and the Fed and the government are in bed with each other anyway, so they're always going to accept loans from the government.
The Blankinator made a couple of chat posts here that are interesting. He said, for context, I'm an 8th grader. In civics class, they teach me that government prevents monopolies. They teach that the government helps smaller businesses while simultaneously saying that the government lets corporations act as a legal person. I'm quite impressed that you have picked up on the fact that, yes, your schools are basically little liberal indoctrination centers, and there is a blatant liberal agenda among all of your educators, basically, or the overwhelming majority of them. The few that are conservative or libertarian are usually socially pressured into silence. You might, in high school, get lucky and get an economics teacher who will show you John Stossel videos or express some vaguely conservative or libertarian economic ideas, at least expose those to you. That happened to me. I was very grateful to have a professor like that, and I loved that class. But yeah, for the most part, schools are little liberal indoctrination centers, and it's really irritating.
Yeah, we've heard about that from Atomic because he's going through it. And I think also, if I'm not mistaken, the executioner is either still in school or was recently in school. So, you know, we've heard about all sorts of stuff from them. And Manny Kabilt says, yeah, the government's the biggest monopoly. This has always amazed me how, you know, liberals are always like, oh, capitalism is terrible because it creates monopolies. Monopolies are bad. But then when it comes to stuff the government does, oh, yeah, well, police need to be a monopoly and your power and water and your utilities have to be monopolies. Why? I thought you were against monopolies.
Yeah, I'm eternally grateful to a high school teacher that introduced me to John Stossel, and that just completely changed my outlook.
Yeah, he has a whole bunch of videos called Stossel in the Classroom, and I don't even think you have to like sign up or anything. I think you just take them and show them in class.
Yeah, I think that well qualifies under fair use, you know, as educational.
Yeah, but I mean, I think he put them up specifically saying, "Hey, you know, do this. You don't have to, you know, license it from me or anything. Just do it."
Okay.
Yeah, Filthy with a good one. Guns are bad, so let's give the government a monopoly on firearms. Yeah, because even if it does work as they say they do, and they can keep it out of the hands of criminals, that means the government is the only one left with firearms.
And yeah, they have such a good track record with, you know, not killing people and not committing crimes.
Okay. So one thing that's kind of I've thought a little bit more over is I generally think we've got the whole concept of proportionality, right? So basically, if someone steals from you, you can't just shoot them in the head, or if they're trespassing, you can't just fire them off or something like that. So my question is, so let's just say, for example, you see someone, basically, you see them so you go back to, so let's just say you go to your house and you see someone trying to steal, I don't know, your TV, for example, and then you basically say, hey, put that down or come back here. And let's just say they clearly acknowledge it and they refuse to. So I think I've seen some theorists who basically suggest that when they refuse to basically, respond or try to engage, that they've given up all of their rights. So then you could just fire off their head if they refuse to actually try to negotiate with you. So in that case, should we still apply proportionality? So if you've clearly tried engaging in them when they're in the act and they refuse to stop it.
The Filthy Heretic is wanting to join, and he's been on the live stream a couple of times before, and he's been good. So if no one complains, even though he's not a supporter or a co-host, I'm gonna let him on. So Filthy, just send me a DM and I'll get you the link.
Regarding that, the proportionality, here's a thought. Effectively, the punishment for trying to steal an electrical transformer is that you die from electrocution. So there's it's not a person enforcing that law.
This is sounding a bit like Dostoevsky here.
Yeah, but I'm not familiar, but there's not a human being behind who pulls the trigger and electrocutes the person trying to steal the transformer. But there is some poetic justice in that anybody who tries to take a hold of that transformer from the power pole is going to get shocked, and so it's the perfect deterrent, and that's why they don't get stolen.
Okay, so you're not talking about like the electric chair. You're talking about basically booby trapping it so that any unauthorized person grabbing it gets electrocuted.
Well, I'm just saying that it's naturally booby-trapped because there's so much current and such a high voltage going through it.
Oh, okay.
That you would have to be crazy to try to steal an electrical transformer, and thus they don't require a person guarding them.
Yeah,
But
like
it's interesting that once you introduce a person, let's say electrical transformers were harmless, but you did have people armed with guns ready to shoot anybody who stole them, if that was a problem. Why would that be worse?
Yeah.
I mean, so my understanding of the proportionality is you are justified in using the minimum necessary force to stop aggression. Now, you can have back and forth arguments of, someone's stealing a TV, they refuse to put it down even, and then they refuse, so you pull out a shotgun and they still refuse to put it down. Are you then allowed to shoot them? Well, yes, because you're clearly threatening them with violence if they do not cease stealing your stuff. So, I mean, you can have back and forth arguments about that.
Yeah.
The entire.
That's the point. It's not about proportionality. It's about necessity. Do what is necessary to the options that are available to you as a reasonable person to stop the aggression. But when you go beyond that, then you become an aggressor yourself. So it's not really about how you some kind of like cosmic scale, like however bad that thing is they're trying to do to you, you get to do something that bad to them. You do what is necessary to stop it.
Let's take this to the most ridiculously comically extreme version of this. Suppose somebody was standing on the sidewalk at the edge of your property and insists on putting one toe on your driveway. At what point, or let's make it a vital organ. They're sticking their head and laying it down on your driveway. At one point, do you have the right to bulldoze their head off of your driveway? If that's the only way to get it off.
You need to give them sufficient warning first. And I mean, there's not much of a threat in that case. But let's welcome Filthy to the chat. How you doing, Filthy?
Let's say if we try telling them to get off immediately, and let's say they're conscious too. If they just refuse to, I'd say the right to pull out and murder and kill them at that point because.
Hang on. I like Enter the Tech in this response in the chat. Mow the lawn.
There you go. You have a right to mow your lawn. Yep.
I mean, I think retaliation has to be proportional.
Well, that's just what we were talking about, the difference between proportionality and necessity, and I maintain it's about necessity, not proportionality.
Well, let's examine a proportional response. For example, I like to think about when I ride when I ride mass transportation, I should say. I buy a ticket. There's usually nobody enforcing whether or not I have a ticket to ride the train. But if I don't buy the ticket and I get caught, I get fined. Now, one time stealing that ride I've only stolen $4 worth of services from the train company, but shouldn't they be allowed to fine me well more than that? Because that is what is necessary to prevent people from stealing their services in the first place.
Well, I guess the question. So I'm thinking, let's just say you're on the train and they figure out that you didn't pay your ticket, and that, let's just say, okay, well, now you have to fine us. Let's just say, okay, let's say you refuse to fine them and you're on the train. Do they have the right to throw you off, which could kill you because you're violating the property rights of them?
Well, I mean, they have the right to do whatever they want since it's their property.
Well, they don't have. Hang on, they don't have the right to throw you off into an oncoming pole or whatever. But they have the right to kick you off the next station, and they also have the right to seek damages against you for using their service without paying.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between saying he's trespassing on my property, I get to physically throw him off, as opposed to he's on my property, therefore I get to rape him. That's it's not that you can do whatever you want. It's that it has to be at least reasonable for the goal of correcting and correcting for the aggression.
Yeah. Well, let's specifically address the issue of, it doesn't necessarily have to be for that specific case. For example, riding the train without a pass is an offense, and it carries a fine with it that exceeds the expected value of stealing the ticket in the first place. So if I steal a ticket, I might get caught 1 out of 10 times, but I'm going to get fined $50 or $100, even though the ticket price is only $4. So it's not worth it. It's more expensive to ride the train without tickets than it is to ride it with tickets. Is that justified?
I think so, because it wouldn't be fair. Like, what if all the tickets are sold out and they go on the train and now someone who's paid a ticket doesn't get their seat? Ticket means that you can make sure that only a certain number of people get on the train and there's enough seats for them, and if you feed them, there's enough food and everything. And someone who's trying to sneak on the train and not get that is kind of upsetting all of that. So yeah, I think it is fair to make them pay more as a fine.
Well, let's presume that you are riding the train at a time when it is certainly going to be at below capacity. So you're not going to be denying anybody a ride. You're just going to be not paying the fare, which should cover the maintenance and stuff.
I think
the principle is the same, though. I mean, you have to have these things be consistent. So I mean, It doesn't really matter if at that particular time it's not. It's still you have to have a consistent policy.
Okay, fair enough. Then we extend this thought experiment to say, well, can the fine be $100,000 then?
If the fine's $100,000, who's going to pay that?
Crazy people.
No, but I mean, how are you going to actually enforce someone paying $100,000? I think is the question.
Well, you would bankrupt them, and a few crazy people wouldn't properly evaluate the risk when they decided to steal or they just didn't know and didn't bother to read the sign that the fine is $100,000 and they stole the ticket anyway. Is that just to be able to levy a fine of $100,000 against somebody for stealing a ticket? If it's justifiable to levy a fine that exceeds the expected value of the theft of services, is it justifiable to levy a fine that is arbitrarily higher than that?
Well, I think you probably resolve this through a arbiter. So, and this would be as is an expectation of an arbiter is that both parties agree to whatever outcome the arbiters decided. So let's just say they both go to the arbiter, and let's just say the arbiter decides, okay, you owe $100,000, and because they've entered the arbitration, they've implicitly agreed to the outcome. In that case, now let's just say the criminal doesn't choose to pay up the fine. I think in that case, you could actually use force and force them to pay up the $100,000, or they have to take out some money from a bank and then give you the $100,000 because, well, now you're not paying up a contract that you've been.
Whatever you agree to with the arbitration. But I mean, and a lot of it might, if you think about, going to an arbiter and, what the other person might say, if the person just doesn't have that much money and doesn't have $100,000, I mean, you can't get, blood from a turnip. So the arbiter might say, well, in that case, it wouldn't be fair to try and make him pay that. We'll have him be a much lower fine. Whereas if he's, Elon Musk or someone and has more money than God and he's got billions, like, yeah, you can afford the $100,000, fork it over.
I can imagine that there are some other options that might be available as well. If you can't afford the $100,000, they might agree to some kind of payment plan where you agree to spend or put 10% of your wages to paying off this debt. Alternatively, you could I lost my train of thought. Alternatively,
you didn't buy a ticket for your train of thought.
Yeah, I didn't buy a ticket for my train of thought, and I need to pay $100 billion for this. Who do I write this check out to?
Just write it out to Shane Killian. I'll take care of it.
This actually has pretty much a real world example, and that is hospital bills. You go to the hospital, you can ask them what it's going to cost, and they're not going to give you an answer. Yeah, I think that should be a law. They should have to tell you what the cost of the service is going to be before they administer it.
Yeah, it's gotten crazy. Yeah.
And
if someone doesn't tell you the cost of whatever it is, and then does it anyway, that's an unenforceable contract. You shouldn't have to pay a cent.
Yeah, and then there's an interesting thing. Now, granted, my source for this information is Adam Ruins Everything, but presuming that he didn't get this wrong, that there is there's often an agreements between the hospital and the insurance companies that are that they accept, and that the hospitals will charge different prices to the insurance companies as they do to the uninsured patients. Should that practice even be allowed? Should the hospital have to bill everybody the same cost for the same service?
Well, it's not exactly what happens. What they do is they negotiate a discount on behalf of their members, which they are allowed to do. And they say, well, like if they say, hey, give us a 20% discount, but how are they going to make that money back? They have to, effectively, they're just raising all of their prices, 20%, or actually not quite, whatever it would be, so that when they give them the 20% discount, they're making the same amount, which means that everyone else is paying more. So it's not directly, hey, you have to charge other people more than us. You can charge, other people whatever you want, but for us, we get that discount. And so it's just a consequence of that.
I expect that if the previous proposal that they have to disclose the price before rendering the service, if that were the policy, I suspect that the price discrepancy would go away because people would be so outraged. Wait, how can you charge the people from these insurance companies less and have us make up the cost? And it would create probably a tremendous amount of pressure on them to have a fair pricing scheme.
Well, and it's not even a question of, you don't even have to know what it is that they're charging the insurance company. You could look at their price and you're either willing to pay that price or you're not. And you could actually shop around, look at other doctors' offices, see how much they're going to charge you. And it's just a matter of, are you willing to pay that much for it? That's how prices work.
Yeah. And then that raises the whole question of, what if you are incapable, you're unconscious, you're taken to a hospital. We certainly want to create a profit incentive for hospitals to care for people who are incapable of making their own decisions. And so they should be compensated for that. But, I would argue if you're taken to a hospital, you didn't officially consent to care, they can't bill you for that service until you have.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree. You didn't consent for it, so you're not liable for it.
Okay. I think
but at the same time, I certainly do want them to treat me so that perhaps some form of compensation, especially if you're at fault for your own injury.
If you think about the future, it's like, if something happens, would you want to go to that hospital again?
Well, I'm thinking that there's a very simple solution that already exists and has historically existed. That if people are going to receive some form of health insurance, either through their employer, they bought it themselves, or from fraternal society, they're going to be the ones who are going to be paying because they're networked with that hospital. So person doesn't need to pay.
It's actually amazing looking at my mother's history. I've talked about this a little bit. She was a child of the Depression, and her mom was from a poor farming family, had her at 16 years old as a single mother at a time before welfare benefits, before child support and stuff like that. And so this was the Depression, and then later World War II, where just no one was doing well. But still, they never went without medical insurance. Medical insurance was that cheap before government started getting into it to fix it.
Before it was like $2 I don't remember if it was like a month or a year, but it was some outrageously cheap amount.
I think it was like the equivalent of 1 day's wages for a year or something like that.
And just to put this in perspective for a lot of people, I believe like during the year 100 AE, around the height of the Roman Empire, the average citizen could pay for the entire military industrial complex of the Roman Empire, plus for all those services, on the equivalent of 3 days' wage. So that's a lot of buying power.
Yeah.
No, it's not always appropriate to compare healthcare costs of the past to healthcare costs of today, because certainly a lot of innovation has come about since then. There's a lot of technology that makes healthcare a lot better, and not all
But
of
at
that
the same
technology is
time,
cheap.
historically, technology and free markets at least has made things cheaper, not more expensive.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look at how cheaply you can get a pretty big screen, TV, high def or even 4K for the price that you couldn't even buy like a 30-inch tube TV in 1990.
Yes, and certainly the healthcare that was available at a time in a free market, that those services have come down in price. I'm saying that there's the free market will also expand your options. So instead of there's only these relatively cheap options, but that's the best of the best. Now we also have extremely expensive, slightly more effective options, and if you're dying, you're going to go with the best of the best.
But I mean, the point is that now, with TVs, the cheapest option is better in pretty much every way than, the most expensive option was back then. So, I mean, it's not just the fact that it's gotten cheaper while the quality has gone up, and while you have not just the three channels you can get with rabbit ears, but I mean, you can get all sorts of channels over cable. You can get them over the internet. You can watch Netflix. You can watch, all sorts of stuff on your regular TV.
My point is kind of like, just because there has been advancements doesn't mean that the expense to the consumer is going to decrease. I mean, think about how much the average person spent on computers in 1960. But today they spend a lot more on computers and computer technology than they do, because it's become that much more valuable.
Well, because an individual couldn't get a computer. An individual couldn't get a computer in the personal computers didn't exist.
Exactly my point.
I'm
saying that certain industries that have seen a lot of advancement may or may not become a bigger part of our budget, of our personal budgets. Computers have become a bigger part of our personal budget than they have, because they've become more valuable. Same sort of thing can happen with healthcare, where the average person, even if it was a perfectly free market, the average person might be spending more on healthcare because they're getting more out of it.
It might also just be that, well, the option is now more freely available, as Shane was talking about. I mean, people spend more on antibiotics now than they did during the time of Jesus Christ. I think that's a fairly relevant example if we're talking about healthcare. The option is now available, so yeah, people are going to consume it.
But I mean, even if you consider, this is the point I keep making, because they talk about how much more we pay for healthcare, and they never seem to want to consider how much, the taxation costs or the costs of things like rationing and things like that. But they say, oh, well, as a percentage of GDP, Americans pay more. Well, you know what? We also pay more per GDP than people in third world countries who don't have any health care because they're not paying anything on it. That's not really a good measure of quality.
Yeah, I think there is because there is the fact that an MRI is going to cost more than a pack of bandages, and that's simply because an MRI is a lot more complicated to build, maintain, operate, etc. And so that's always going to be more expensive than a pack of bandages. But what the free market does is bring the cost down and the quality up. Whereas when government gets involved, it just becomes horribly bloated.
Well, and that's what's not being allowed to happen with the MRI, because there are all these price controls on it, which means, you can't get that, early adopter effect. Like I keep mentioning TVs, those first high definition televisions were, $20,000, and now you can get them for, a couple hundred. because of that early adopter effect and the market effects that come from that. But with the price controls there have been on MRIs, that severely limited production, that's actually kept them far more expensive than they would be by now if they had just let the price mechanism work.
I just thought of this just to illustrate how well the free market is doing at bringing the costs of things down. It very much outpaces inflation, even. The fact that the free market can so strongly outpace inflation is just evidence to say that, yes, the free market brings prices down and quality up.
But I mean, you're looking at healthcare, PricewaterhouseCoopers, always, every year they have a report on what's been driving the cost of healthcare. And, you know, this is even before Obamacare, because again, people are pretending it was a 100% free market before Obamacare, which is, you know, ridiculous. But I mean, even before then, you would look at it and, okay, inflation would be some of it. And people would talk about things like, you know, overcharging due to insurance. Okay, that's some of it. But one of the biggest ones, I mean, driving like, I think almost a third, certainly over a quarter of the increase in price of healthcare was the regulatory burden. And I mean, that's kind of like been the biggest single factor of why it's so expensive.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about healthcare specifically. I was speaking more generally.
Right. Right. But the point is, even when you're just looking at the cost of regulatory compliance, that's this huge thing. And that doesn't even count the extended effects, the market effects of that regulation, like what I was talking about with the MRI. I mean, that has always been one of the biggest drivers in the increasing price of healthcare. It's the regulations.
I believe the economy in total, not just healthcare, spent about $2 to $3 trillion in regulatory compliance. And if you freeze increases in regulation since 1949, I'm sure you're familiar with this, Shane, you would have a GDP in 2012 in the United States of about 55 trillion. It's hard to imagine what kind of technological and medical innovations were prevented from occurring because of this. But I think we actually already have a pretty good idea, because guess what? We've cured cancer.
But it's been the case for, you know, a few decades now, if not more, that firms as a whole have paid out more complying with government regulations than they have made in profits. And, you know, people are talking about, oh, well, these obscene profits by these, you know, big mega corporations. Well, they're paying even more complying with these regulations. You know, what do you want? Blood?
I think they want blood. I mean, you talk to Marxists, they literally want blood. I've actually had several death threats from people I was debating with from this. But yeah.
So Blakeinator points out my 2 cents just uploaded, and I like his channel, so go check it out. And Manny Cabilt, I believe Esso and Filthy are both with the Cool Capitalist Kid. He's asking, is there a Cool Capitalist Kid tonight?
No.
Unfortunately, no.
We've been experimenting with trying to find a different hosting service for the stream, because Google and Discord are not really working out for us very well.
We've had a lot of technical difficulties with them. We've switched from Google Hangouts to Mumble, and we're working on getting a new stream hosting site tonight. When we get one, we'll let you know on Cool Capitalist Kids Discord server, as well as Esso and my servers. And more importantly, when we do actually start streaming, we'll be sure to spread the link as far as we possibly can.
I mean,
I'm not. Go ahead.
We'll probably have one set up by the beginning of next week, so the next episode.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Mumble, so I don't know what it works with. But I don't know if you wanted to try BitTube. A lot of people are having success with the live broadcasts, doing live broadcasts over on BitTube, and you get paid just from people watching, and there's no ads or anything like that, which is pretty cool. So you might want to give that a try. I haven't really been pushing it that much because they're redoing the site from the ground up, and the one they're working on looks a lot better. So Todd Rankles, 1999. Thank you so much, Todd, for that super chat. Esso, Filthy, Shane, great stuff this week, and I'm sure he would apply that to everyone else as well. Sorry I missed everything tonight. I'd love to take part in a chat at some point. My grandparents had the option of house calls. after 1925, things started to decline rapidly. Yeah, you could call your doctor. You didn't have to go to your doctor. He would, even in like, I think the 60s, he would still come over to your house and just visit you in bed there and do that. Yeah, that was what they did.
The main
Yeah,
thing
I
was
think-
that they had the American Medical Association, which by the way is still around today, lobbied the government to have their profession be licensed, not out of any desire to maintain the quality of the doctors, but because they thought that the dignity of the doctors was not being respected highly enough, and it needed to be more expensive because their main complaint, this isn't my understanding of what happened, this is their words, paraphrased, that they thought healthcare was too cheap.
Yeah, when Ron Paul started practicing medicine, I think he said he was only making, like $1 or $2 an hour or something like that. Basically minimum wage when he was starting out. But that's it. There were just so many doctors. And now, you go to a clinic and there's like a few doctors there and you only see them a little bit of the time because they're spending the rest of the time doing government mandated paperwork. And that's not accounting for all of the other people they employ to run the office and do all of the other stuff, most of which, and it's just gotten so much worse with Obamacare. So yeah. Pip, were you trying to say something? We might have been talking over you.
Yeah, that was earlier.
But
okay.
What I was going to say is prior to 1925, there wasn't even a medical insurance industry. Medical insurance only exists because of that 1918 law, which Filthy Heretic was referring to, which, by the way, the study which that law was passed based on a study commissioned by the Carnegie Foundation. So, yeah, it's very interesting.
Hey, it sounds like someone just gabbed you.
Yeah, I have the tab on Gab open. Rhymes.
All right, we've gone past 10 o'clock, so I guess it's time for any parting comments anyone has.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't as active on this stream. Like, I barely said anything. There's just been a lot of stuff going on Discord right now that I was dealing with while I was sitting here in the call. But from what I could hear going on in the background, it didn't sound like there was much that I was able to provide to the conversation that I wasn't saying.
We got little Elon on cam over there. So cute.
Oh, hi.
Hey.
Hello.
Yep, I'm just going to put Elon on cam as my closing thoughts. So how cute he is.
Darth, you haven't said much. You got anything you want to say before we close off?
Taxation is theft and all gun laws are an infringement.
That sounds good to me. Pacna, anything?
Yeah, this is a nice chat. I thought we covered some pretty did some nice coverage of some big issues like proportionality, abortion, little on immigration, so forth. That was nice to be able to get through some of those. So yeah, I enjoyed. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining. We've got Pipsqueak, Pacna, Filthy Esoteric Darth, and Alex. Earlier, we also had Charles. Do we have anyone else in who dropped out? I think I've got them all. And thanks to, of course, to all of the supporters. That's who I do this for. Thanks also to Todd Rankles and King Thorhammer for all of the super chats. And that's a good way to keep everything going here. And also thanks to everyone who participated in the chat, everyone who watches the channel, everyone who's watched this live stream. Thank you so much. We will see you next month.